Hello, today is Saturday, January 15th, 2022. I am your host, Gray. Welcome to the Misfits of the Galaxy vlog series. This is the third part. This video blog series is a way for me to put all my thoughts together in constructing a campaign setting, and hopefully those who tune in will be able to take some of the details of the process that I'm going through and use it for their own benefit. That's mainly why I'm recording this. So, a bit of a backstory. I am a cast member of the Isle of Misfit Rolls podcast and Twitch stream. If you haven't heard about us before, I'll put the links down below. But we've been having a amazing time with our DM Mike running us through a story in the world of Vertes. I'm really enjoying playing the host of characters I've played in the campaign so far, not to mention like interacting with all the other players. But as we are anticipating season 2 starting very shortly, the reality of the matter is, like all good stories, there will eventually be an end. And the question becomes is, what do we do next? Well, I really enjoy playing with everybody, and I know Mike prefers to play over DM, so I'm trying to put together a campaign that they will enjoy. But I didn't want to do anything that had already been done. We've explored high fantasy through D&D 5e, and we've tried a few forays into some different rule sets, but everybody at the group seems to be very comfortable with 5th edition. So the reality of the matter is I'm going to give them what they want, but at the same time, I want to move a little bit away from high fantasy. It's not that I'm not going to include it or anything. It's just that it I want to put something else into the campaign as well. So I've decided to do like a hybrid between high fantasy and space opera. Since we have a bunch of Star Wars fans and Firefly fans and fans of other sci-fi television series and movies sitting at the table, and I'm certain that they would have a grand old time with it. So I'm trying to mix a bunch of concepts together and trying to flesh it all out at this point. I've droned on for 2.5 minutes about this, and I'm a bit sorry. I'm trying to keep these down to about 15 minutes. The last one went well over my initial plan, so let me just jump right into the thick of things. So, the last two episodes, the first one was about abundance, the halfling homeworld, as well as halflings, and the entire idea of cross-species adoption, which kind of moved organically into discussing the orcs as well as the orcish world of Dagash. Now, one of my friends who's been listening to the first two episodes mentioned two things which kind of resonated. The first is I haven't really got into any of the mechanics of the worlds or the races or anything, and that's because I don't really see much need to do that at this point. Trying to flesh out the backstory of everything, but more importantly, the halflings I'm going to use are just probably going to be the Lightfoot and the Stout sub races that are found in the PHB. So I don't really need to go over mechanics for anyone who's overly familiar with D&D. As for the orcs, I'm just using the regular orc stats that you can pull from uh, Wild Mount or Eberron or even Volo's Guide to Monsters. I'm not really making any changes there. No waves to those particular races or species. However, one thing that I've made different is their cultures to a certain extent. However, one of my friends, the same friend, also pointed out that the culture that I've kind of created for the orcs has striking similarities to that of the Legion of one of the of Tavrok in our Isle Misfit Rolls podcast. And after looking at it a bit, I would have to agree. I do apologize if the lighting's changing a little. I'm still trying to sort all that out. So yeah, I looked at it, and yeah, he's got some very valid points as to yes, these two are very similar to one another. One of the wonderful things about creating this video blog series is I can make changes as I go along, and just because on one episode I come up with an idea doesn't necessarily mean that when the end product comes around it's going to still be there. I haven't necessarily decided that I'm going to change the orcs drastically. I do like the entire idea of elven uh, galactic and colonialism ruining their homeworld, and that's why there's animosity between the orcs and the elves. But as for the rest of it, well, we'll wait and see. But since we did mention Tavrok, who happens to be a hobgoblin in our current podcast, I thought like maybe approaching the idea of what I want to do with goblins in this setting. This this episode might have a discussion or discuss mechanics a little bit more than my previous episodes. So if that's not your thing, I completely understand it. But if it is, sit back and enjoy. So when it comes to goblins, I like the fact that they are extremely versatile. Like they're supposed to be a low-level mob that, like in the old school D&D, whether it be BECME or AD&D Second Edition or what have you, they're like one of the first monsters that the players typically encounter. Not just in those settings, but pretty much almost in every video game imaginable or other piece of literature or genre dealing with high fantasy in some vein or another. If goblins exist, they're typically the low-rung soldiers of evil in the setting. So, with that in mind, I thought I'd put my own spin on things and see what I can do about it. And while I was researching it, I came across another YouTuber by the name of I hope I pronounce this correctly, Kanekuo, who created a animated series called Monsters Misguided, and he did this entire video on Goblin Evolution Explained. In that, he discussed how goblins are extremely adaptable and they can go through uh, physiological and mental changes in order to adapt to the harsh environments that they find themselves in. And I thought that was a really, really cool concept. And so I'm gonna borrow that for this for the Misfits of the Galaxy, and I'm gonna make your standard goblin this extremely adaptable creature, capable of surviving pretty much any sort of hostile environment, provided it's not outright deadly. And in order to reflect that in the mechanics, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the Tasha's Cauldron to Everything custom lineage rules and call them variant goblins. So a player can pretty much come up with any sort of idea as to, like, do they want to play a city goblin that's tall and sociable and gregarious and is very fluent in multiple languages? They can play one. Do they want to play like a Arctic goblin covered in like fur and being able to walk atop the snow and all that? They can do that. All these are those two and all the others would definitely be considered goblins, each one adapted to a different climate or environment that they find themselves in. No two goblins of the variant goblins are alike. Just because a variant goblin's parent is one like adapted to one type of environment doesn't necessarily mean the child will be raised in another, or even if they are born into the same environment, that doesn't necessarily isn't reflected physiologically or mentally. Perhaps the parent uh, survives an Arctic frozen world by hibernating during the coldest winter months. Meanwhile, their child might be born covered head to toe in fur and like an insulating layer of fat in order to survive the harsh the cold temperatures and the harsh winds. It's completely up to the imagination of the players if they want to play one, and if I want to describe a goblin, it's completely like one to another. They're going to be completely different than one another. At least that's for the variant goblins. There will be, of course, the three traditional type of goblins that we are well and familiar with. But in this case, the goblin that we are all too familiar with from the Monsters Manual and Volo's Guide to Monsters will simply be called the common goblin. And then we, of course, will have hobgoblins and bugbears. In those three particular subspecies of or subraces, whatever you want to call them, the idea would be that the variant goblin is the main species, and over time, uh, those three subraces found themselves in very similar conditions for extended periods and over multiple generations. Eventually, they became, I guess you'd call it, almost a stable mutation, where the traits are being passed from one generation to the next, from parent to offspring, and so forth and so forth. In particular, like I'm thinking about bugbears maybe living on a heavily forested world where everything is big, like suffer. So therefore, the bugbears themselves are big, but they have to adapt to. They need to strike hard and they need to strike fast against whatever they're hunting to bring it down. Because if you don't, your prey will quickly turn around and make you the prey, in a manner of speaking. Maybe a world filled with giant and dire versions of various species. It would definitely explain why the bugbears have reach and are real sneaky and have their ability to do extra damage on that first attack when you're speaking from a mechanical standpoint. Uh, I like the idea that was presented in the UA about like goblins of the Feywilds to a certain extent. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe I'll do something where the hobgoblins were effectively bred for war, and that's why they have this this very disciplined, militaristic culture and society. Not to mention the various racial traits that we have become familiar with when it comes to the hobgoblin species. As for common goblins, well, they're the ones that just simply are most prevalent in the universe. They anywhere from a desert world to a bus that has like maybe one or two small communities on it, or perhaps it's just one lone goblin. Who knows? To like a massive metropolis style world where the entire world is covered in one giant city. These common goblins would be like prevalent. I'm not going to say that they breed like rats or anything like that, but very very similar in the idea that they just because of their because of the traits they have and everything else, they thrive in a lot of different environments. So those are kind of the ideas I'm working with right now. I have some ideas about maybe the the goblins initially coming from like a swampy world where the sky is like perpetually covered in almost a thick mist or fog, and the sun is nothing but like this sickly light in the sky during the day, and it very depressing sort of atmosphere. Um, but at the same time, it would explain why most goblins have dark vision and everything else. And so the precursor to the goblins, their ancestors crawled out of the muck one day, and this world was extremely hostile towards them. It was this entire adapt or die mentality, which was presented. Hence, why the variant goblins are so adaptable to whatever conditions they find themselves in. I'm also thinking that maybe some scholars think that gnomes and halflings are somehow related to goblins, especially considering goblins are so adaptable to their environment. Some scholars might think, okay, well, gnomes and halflings might very well be goblins that simply adapted to different environments. In the case of halflings, a very rural environment where very few threats and what have you. And in the case of gnomes, well, if it's a forest gnome, obviously forest. If it's a rock gnome, it would clearly be a more of an industrious environment. Of course, both the halfling and the gnome species would definitely venomously deny any sort of relation to the goblins whatsoever. But it's an idea I'm kind of playing around with. I know that this isn't as it's not as thorough as perhaps the first two episodes, and I went in in-depth details about two different worlds in those particular episodes. But the reality of the matter is, I thought that I'd change it up a little and see how it worked out with my ramblings today. If I don't like it, I'll go back to the similar method as episode 1 and 2 in the next episode. But if this seems to be working out, I might continue with it. In which case, you'll hear more about mechanics over setting. Honestly, though, after end of the day, I think I'm going to need a healthy mix of both. It's great developing and fleshing out a world and everything for the players to play around in, but end of the day, the rules help us define that world to a certain extent. Yeah, we could it's all theater of the imagination and what have you when you're playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons. But at the same time, the like as long as the rules don't ruin the fun, they're there for a reason in some cases, to ensure that everyone's on the same level playing field sort of deal. Uh, this there's probably going to be a lot of people out there that disagree with this sort of train of thought, obviously, and they're everyone's entitled to their own opinion on this. It's just over the years of playing D&D and other tabletop RPGs and that, this is just sort of my critique of over roll, as in rolling the dice, versus roll as in portraying a character. They go kind of hand in hand with one another. Uh, there are people that say, "Oh, they want the hard, crunchy rule set that is heavily defines everything," and then there are the players that want, story over everything else, and both sort of trains of thought are more than welcome. As for myself, I kind of like to stay in the middle where it's I like the rules there for a reason, but if they have to have a good reason to them, and they have to sort of help the story flow in a manner of speaking. Anyways, I apologize. That's the end of that rambling for today. I This is rolling in at almost 19 minutes at this point. It's going to be pretty difficult keeping it to 15 minutes, so I might need to reconsider my time, how I'm investing my time in this. But anyways, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. If you have any comments, please put them down below. Till next time, may your dice always end up rolling a natural 20. Take care.